And I'll just quickly start sharing screen. So we've got just a couple of slides to go through before Matt makes a start. I'll just make sure I've got everything loaded. Oh, thank you so much. We might make a start. I think we were just chatting before about virtual meetings. Everyone jumps on right on the perfect time, maybe a little bit late, but we might make a start. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. This is the PowerBI4Enviro's monthly meetup group. So our mission is really just to share case studies across the environmental industry of people doing awesome things in Power BI. Also provide a bit of a community where we can get together, share different tips and techniques for visualizing and analyzing environmental data, and just really to try to create that network as well. Was chatting with Matt a little bit before just about how our user group's a little bit different to the other Power BI user groups out there, which tend to focus on really cool advanced things in Power BI. But this group's a really nice one to bring people together who both kind of share that passion and love for the environmental industry and environmental data, but also the amazing things you can do in Power BI. So thanks so much for joining us. If you're new, welcome. You see we've got quite a few regulars on the line, so thank you so much. Welcome back. Just as usual, we're running this using Microsoft Teams. If you don't mind, just to save on bandwidth, we love seeing everyone's faces and everything. But if you do have a bit of internet problem, just please turn your video off if you're not speaking and mute off if you're not speaking as well. But at any stage, we do encourage, this is a really interactive, informal group. Please, if you have any questions, you can use the raise a hand, type in the chat, or feel free, just go off mute and ask away. This is your session. The session is also being recorded as well. So if anyone misses out, or if you know of any other people in your community who might be interested, we'll share a link to the recording and also some key takeaways on the Discovery AI blog site as well. So that's what we do every month. Before we dive in, I just want to do a quick acknowledgement of country. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which myself and also Christian are based. So it's the Boon Wurrung and Bunurong people, members of the Kulin Nation. So we're down in Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, but also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of which everyone else is presenting and attending today. Quick thanks to our event sponsors, which is Discovery AI. So at Discovery AI, we do a bit of Power BI training and mentoring, Power BI custom visuals, end-to-end Power BI reporting, infographics and animations, and also a little bit of custom web applications, all focused on the environmental industry as well. But the star of the show today is Matt Allington. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. I'm really excited about this session. This is going to be a really interesting session, I think, for lots of our members on the call. It's kind of, you've kind of coined it a warts and all presentation about your kind of typical thought process to tackling a really interesting Power BI problem, like an everyday problem. So what size rainwater tank do you need? So I think this will be really interesting just to kind of go inside your brain and see how you would approach a Power BI problem, the type of kind of workflow that you would go through, and maybe something that people can practice at home with their own data in their own location as well. So a little bit about Matt. Matt Allington is based in Sydney. So he's a career expert in BI and has more than 30 years experience in using data to deliver business value. He's a Microsoft MVP in Power BI in data platform and specializes in Power BI, Power Query, and Power Pivot for Excel. So he combines his business and IT experience together to deliver training, consulting, and general business data problem solving to clients worldwide. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Supercharge Power BI. Power BI is better when you learn to write DAX. We've got that book. That book is awesome. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today virtually, Matt.
So great, thanks very much, Alice. I'm going to jump in and share my screen if that's okay. So let me see
Awesome.
if I can get this going. Get this on the right screen and the old screen cut over. Rick. All right, yeah, so look, thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. And yeah, the general topic is how big should my water tank be? But I guess I could give it another title. Yeah, how to hack away at your data, or how to get practice using Power BI, or how do I be good at Power BI? I mean, all of these things could be alternative titles, but as it turns out, this is the problem that I've tried to solve. I do have a separate presentation on this. It's on my YouTube channel, and I've taken a slightly different approach today because I like to sort of, I guess, reshare the content that I create, but also, you know, I'm on a journey as well with everything that I do. And so what I started out doing yesterday, I may end up doing something different tomorrow. So even though I have got this a similar presentation on my YouTube channel, this is actually going to be slightly different. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Alice has already introduced myself. So yeah, so I'll sort of jump straight into to my presentation. So I want to start off by saying that if you want to be good with Power BI, you've got to get some practice. You know, I give this example in my training courses and various things that I do often when I do talks. I play golf, and I'm not very good at playing golf, but I do enjoy it, and I'd like to be better. And I've got a really good book, and it was written by Tiger Woods, and it's got photos and step-by-step instructions of how to play golf and how to hold the club and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, I've read that book, and that doesn't make me good at golf. What makes me good at golf is to take those techniques and apply them in the field. In the case of golf, it's a lifelong journey, and I would argue that in the case of Power BI and the DAX language and Power Query, that's also a lifelong journey. So if you want to be good, and if you get enjoyment out of being good, then you've got to get some practice. So my best advice to you is to find something that you're passionate about, and that can be something in your personal life. It can be something to do with work. If you can find something to do with work, that's the best outcome, because hopefully someone will pay you to learn by doing this practice. But if that's not possible, maybe you're thinking about getting a career in Power BI, but you don't currently have that career. Well, you're going to have to find something else to get some practice with. So yeah, find something that you care about, and if you're passionate about it, and then get some experience. And then I think the last point is that you're going to make mistakes as you go through these processes. So expect to make mistakes, and think of mistakes as being the learning process. And so I certainly made plenty of mistakes when I first started this journey of this water tank scenario, and I'm going to show you perhaps the refined version of that. But I certainly made plenty of mistakes as I went through this example. The other thing I'd just like to call out before digging into it is that this is not about building high quality visual reports or presentations about my water consumption, etc. So, you know, I was reminded when I saw Alice's slide come in. I mean, Alice is the queen of beautiful presentation quality graphics in Power BI. In fact, that's how I first met Alice. Was I saw one of her presentations and it just jumped out of the page at me. And I thought, wow, I got to talk to Alice about. I think she might have presented at my youth group at some stage. Well, certainly we talked about the quality of her presentations. Now, high quality presentation graphics is definitely part of Power BI, but it doesn't have to be that way. So think of Excel. Excel is not a high quality presentation quality tool, or it doesn't have to be. It's also an analytical tool. So what I'm presenting today is more about the process of starting with your data and expanding your data. And I'm certainly not going to spend much time on the presentation quality of my results. So just keep that in mind. All right, so here's the big question. How big should my rainwater tank be? And so we're doing a new construction in South Australia, actually. So So Taylor and Kerry are both, well, certainly have some contact to South Australia. So I'm building this up in the River Murray, and the council told me that I need 50,000 litres of, my water tank had to be 50,000 litres. And I've spent a fair bit of time up there, and I don't reckon it rains that much. And so I didn't think that that was right. I didn't see why I needed a 50,000 litre water tank. And so that's what started me on this journey. And I thought, well, I'm going to use Power BI to try and understand what size I should, what size tank I need. So this is really about the process of how I went about that. So as a general rule, whenever I have a problem, I always start off with create a plan. So at least have some idea in your mind what it is that you're trying to do. Now, some people are very visual. You might want to do it on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper. I tend to draw my pictures in PowerPoint. And some people have got a very good spatial mind, and they can develop a plan in their mind without writing anything down. It doesn't matter, but at least think through what you're trying to do before you get started. Then go and grab some data and start to try and visualize the data in your report. And so once I've got my data loaded, I then start building the business logic. So the formulas, the calculations that I need to do to summarize my data or whatever I need to do, one step at a time, solving each problem as I progress. And then you're going to make mistakes. That's part of the learning process. And then go back and iterate again. Go and grab new data, load the data, make changes, fix your mistakes. This is a continuous process of continuous improvement. You're not going to get it right the first time, so don't expect that. And that's partly what I'm trying to bring out here. So my high-level plan and the logic behind my plan is to work out, well, okay, so we get some rainfall above my house. And so I need to understand how much rainfall do I get? And then I need to work out how much of that rain is captured from my roof space. And then once I've got that, obviously it's going to go into a tank. And then I'm going to consume the water out of that tank over time. And my tank level is going to go up and down, and I'll be able to basically work out what level, what size tank I need. Now, as it turns out, when I first started this journey, the picture I had in my mind was that I was going to be able to work out on a daily basis what level my tank was, and therefore work out the maximum size that I needed. As it turns out, that's a much harder problem to solve in Power BI. And today, as I sit here today, I still haven't solved that problem. But the bottom line is that I got a good enough answer with 20% of the effort, and therefore I've decided to abandon that approach and just basically take the approach that I'm going to share with you today. So that's my high-level plan, and I'm going to show you each of the components of this in my demo presentation, which I'm going to jump into now. So yeah, let me open my workbook, which I should have opened before, but just quickly open now. So this is PowerBI Desktop. You could do this equally in PowerPivot for Excel. I find PowerBI Desktop to be a lot more robust than the alternatives, and certainly than PowerPivot for Excel. And so I prefer to do most of my work inside this tool these days rather than PowerPivot for Excel. All right, so the first thing I need, if you follow my analytical logic, is I need to understand how much rainfall is occurring in my region. And so I've got I went to Dr. Google and searched for rainfall in my region. Now this is the local rainfall gauge, if you like, for the area that I'm talking about. And you can Google this. This is up. It's up on the Murray River. It's about 2 hours from Adelaide. And so when I went to this website, immediately I could see that there's definitely an issue here. So it looks like it's been pretty dry this year. So we're 3 months in, and the total rainfall is 20 mil. So less than an inch in the old money. So yeah, very low rainfall in this region. Now, often what will happen is that you'll have data on a page like this. And what I want to be able to do is be able to load that data. And so just a little bit of investigation, I found out that I could click here, all users data. And when I do that, it downloads a zip file. And if I open this zip file and show it to you, it's literally just an Excel spreadsheet that contains, it looks like this is the station or the data collection point. I'm not even sure. Oh, this is the station number. I'm not sure what this product code is. But the key information for me is the day, month, and year, followed by how much rainfall occurred in that period. And so you can see that it's actually data points starting in 2006. So that's the data that I'm going to load up into Power BI. And if I have a look at this spreadsheet, it's like nearly 6,000 rows of data. I think it's 15 years from memory. So the next thing I did was that I went ahead and loaded the data. And so I'm going to show you the way that I did that. So I'll come into transform data. So when I click transform data, it loads Power Query. And here's the data that I've loaded. And I'll just quickly show you the transformations that I did, because when I first connected to my file, it basically looked like this, where I had exactly as I showed you before. So those first two columns that I didn't need. Then I've got 3 columns representing the date, and then I've got a bit of other information here. So the first step with your raw data is always to go through the cleansing process. And so I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but I stepped through, I removed the columns that I didn't need. I actually merged those 3 columns, which were the year, month, and day. And then once I merged them, I was able to turn that into a proper date format. And then a little bit more cleaning. And I also put a filter here to remove the all the dates before 2007. 2006 was a partial year. And so I just made a decision to load all the data from 2007. All right, so that's pretty much the way that I loaded the data. But I also would just like to point out that I'll jump over here to the query dependency view. So what I've done here, so this view is very good to understand what your Power Query is doing. And so what I did was that I connected to a file. I created a query, which basically is just the connection to the file. And then I did all the transformations inside this data file. However, the problem with the approach that I've taken here, the problem with the approach I've taken here is that I've hard-coded the connection. So I've turned on the formula bar here. So the formula bar is off by default. Power Query, I've turned it on. And so what I did when I loaded this data the first time is that I've literally hard-coded the connection to a file that's called rain_data. Now, the problem with that is when I get a new file, if I want to refresh this data at some point in time, and I get a new copy of the file, which is basically what I've just done, right? So I've downloaded this new copy of the file. But notice that the name of my file is not rain_data. In fact, the name of this file potentially could change. Now, it really does depend on your data, but that could certainly happen. And so, what I'm going to show you is an alternative way of loading this data. So one technique which is really useful in Power Query is to load the latest version of the file. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. So I'm going to write a new query where I get data. I might have to put here. So new source. I'm going to get data, and instead of pointing to a file like I did before, rain_data, I'm going to go to this folder. I'm going to get data from the folder. And whenever I browse for a folder, I prefer to copy the address from Windows Explorer. I just find that the UI is a little bit easier to use. So Control-C, Control-V. I'll just navigate to here. That's not what I meant to do. So let me try again. Resource, more. go from folder base. I'm going to browse because it's the see how this browse. It's just not a good experience. I think it's data. I just copied the link address. All right, so now you can see that there's a single file in this folder, and I'm not going to do a combine, even though get data from folder is designed to combine multiple files together. That's not the only approach. What I'm going to do is say transform the data. And when I get there, you can see that there's only one file in this folder. But if I jump back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this new data file and add it to the folder. And now I've got two data files. I've got the original one and I've got this brand new one, and I haven't changed the name of the file. And so what I'm going to do is I'll just refresh this here, and I'm going to sort my list of files descending. And when I sort descending, it brings the most recent file to the top of the list. And now that the most recent file is at the top of the list, I'm going to click on the top file, the top data point, and that basically loads that file for me. So,
Matt, a quick question.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
Sorry. Stefan.
Yes, please.
I'm just trying to understand. So you link to a folder on your computer, which in that folder you've downloaded the web page information from that site.
That's correct.
Is this what's happening now?
Yes, I've got a data folder containing the downloads. Yes.
Okay, so what happens if you try to link it straight to the web page? So you like the web page, you go in there and you find the table in there. Is
So
this
the short
possible
answer
or
is
the stage
yes,
or?
absolutely, it's possible. But if you notice on this web page, this has just got the current year's worth of data, whereas this download here had 15 years worth of data. And so if you've got a web page that's got all the data that you need, yes, you can connect directly to the web page. In my case, I'm downloading the CSV.
Okay, so yeah, just in case if you want to look in the future, you have a live update of the file, you can actually link to the thing. Yeah, understand.
That's correct. That's
Thanks
correct.
for this. Yeah.
That's correct. No problem.
Matt, I might just jump in there as well because we've got another comment. But also with the BOM website, it also has an API which you can have a look at getting the raw data as well. So once, like, I guess if you've prototyped this all out and you wanted to have a look for more of a long-term solution, there is an API. We've run into a few troubles with it when you publish it to the service. We gave up. But yeah, it's always good to think about soft coding different elements as well. We did have a comment from Kyle just around that you're cleaning the data before you start. They're finding that Power BI has become really useful at identifying data gaps and quality issues. So tend not to dive into cleaning too early in the process. Did you have any comments around that? Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely true. As I said at the start, it's an iterative process. So expect to go back and forth between Power Query and Power BI. I mean, I'm sort of showing you. I actually went through a number of steps, and I'll. But I would agree with that. That don't sort of think that the first time you connect to it, it's going to be exact. You'll find missing data. You'll find sometimes duplicate data, and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, so all right. So look, I'm just going to have to sort of probably pick up the pace a little bit. So one thing I want to point out, though, at this point in time, notice that these two tables are the same. All right, so this is I'm going to call this latest data. And I'm going to set this so that it doesn't load. Now, the point is that this connection here is a named file. Remember, this is the one called rain_data. The trouble is, every time I download a new version, I'm going to have to manually come in and change the connection. So I'm trying to avoid that. So what I've done is I've created a new query here. I sorted based on to bring the most recent one to the top. And then I clicked on the binary, and now I'm at exactly the same point that I was at before. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to this second query. So basically this query did all my transformation. This one is a single file, but this one is the latest file. And I'm just going to repoint my query. So I'm going to say my data, I want to grab it from this one as opposed to the other one. So I'm going in here and I'm going to change the source to be the latest data. I do need to show you one more thing, and that is that when I clicked on the link within Power Query, what it does is it hard codes the name of the file here. And I'm going to make a manual change here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's a much bigger conversation. But when you click on a link inside a query, like I showed you here, what it does is it actually hard codes the reference to that file. And what I'm doing is I'm actually changing this to a relative reference. And so Power Query is a zero-based numbering scheme. So 0 is the first row. So what I'm saying is grab me the first row. And so that's pretty much all the change I have to make. Now, given the time, I'm going to load my calendar table here so that I don't have to come back to it afterwards. Now, this calendar table is developed in Power Query. I do have
Matt, just another question. I think you've just answered it, but this popped up a few minutes ago. Can you show the M code on how you picked up the first file in the list rather than hard code the file name?
Yeah. Okay. So I was planning on going in a lot more depth, but I'm just conscious of time. I mean, sometimes once you get talking about a topic, you sort of, well, I tend to waffle on a little bit anyway. All right, so let me show you. I'll just quickly do that again then, since there's some interest here. So remember, I sorted the row. Now, one of the things I like to do when using Power Query is that I like to use the user interface to generate the code, because I don't know how to write M. I mean, I know how to hack M, but I don't know how to write M code. And so I sorted the column, and I'm now clicking on the first row, and all this code gets generated for me. It automatically got generated. But the point I was trying to make was that this step here, so let me just explain this M code perhaps in a little bit more depth. What this says is go and put a filter on the column called, this is the, on the column called folder path. Sorry, it says go and put a filter on the column called folder path. And then it says go and put another filter on the column called name. And so that would be the same as saying, go and put a filter on folder path is equal to this, and go and put a filter on name is equal to this. And after you've done those two, load the data. That's basically what that encode says. Of course, the problem is that my file name might change. And that's why we can't rely on this bit of encode. So I need to change this encode. Instead of being hard coded, this file name, this folder path, I need to change it to a relative reference. And this curly brackets here, curly brackets basically says which row do I care about. And at the moment, the curly brackets are saying, give me the row that has folder path being water tank data and has file name being this. But if I want to change to a relative reference, which says give me the first row, I just have to delete the absolute reference and replace it with a 0. And because Power Query is a zero-based numbering system, then 0 is the first row. So all I'm saying is instead of giving me this row with a name X, give me the first row. And so it's a simple little hack. If you know how to do it, it's quite simple. So okay, hopefully that answered that question. I'm going to turn on my calendar table. You should load a calendar table if you're doing your own DAX. There is an inbuilt calendar table, but it's much better to load your own. I have a blog article. If you search my website for, and I know Jason's on the call. Jason, I'll ask you just to drop in the chat the link to my calendar table, because I didn't put it in the presentation. But if you search on my website, Power Query calendar table, you'll get to this article. And literally it's just some M code like this. And I just always cut and paste the code into a blank query. And then I've set this particular calendar up so that I can hard code the start date, and the end date by default just goes through to the end of the year. So I do all of my calendar tables like this. It literally takes 30 seconds and you've got a calendar table and you're up and running. All right, so let me jump in and we better start having a look at this data. Now, I haven't joined my calendar table, so I might just quickly come over and do that. So here's my calendar table, and I'm going to join the date column to the date column. So this is part of data modeling. This is a huge topic. One thing I want to point out is that when I join those two columns together, I got a one-to-one relationship, and this is not ideal for Power BI. And once again, a much bigger conversation. But the main type of connection that you should be using in Power BI is a one-to-many relationship. The reason this has created a one-to-one relationship is because this is rainfall data and the data's only got one row per date. And therefore, technically, this is one-to-one, but you should always change this to be a one-to-many. In this case, it's actually many-to-one, so many-to-one. And so I'm going to say this is a many-to-one, and I want the cross filter to be single. This is the correct way to model your data, a one-to-many relationship. All right, so I've got my data loaded. The next thing to do is just to do a quick visualization. And so I'm just going to bring the date into my visual, the date for my calendar table. It's also good practice just to hide this other date. I'm just going to come and hide the date column here. Once you've got a calendar table, you should be using the calendar table in your visual and not the date in the actual data. And I'm also just going to bring that rainfall amount in. Now, this hierarchy here, this date hierarchy, is automatically generated by Power BI. I prefer to turn that off. And so I'm coming up to File, Options and Settings, Options. And I'm just going to go under Current File, Data Load, and turn off this. This is the inbuilt calendar table. I prefer not to use it. And I would recommend that you turn it off. You can turn it off globally, actually. And so now I've got that loaded. Instead, I'm going to go and have a look at the rain by year. So I'm going to bring my year in here. Now, by default, Power BI has detected that the year column is an integer, and therefore it's trying to add the numbers up. Well, that's not what I want. So just to save a bit of time, I'm going to say, don't summarize that data, and I need to change the data type to whole numbers over here. There's quite a bit of setup that you would normally do when you first load your data. And this is all part of the building a data model process. And the good thing about Power BI is when you do this work, you do it once, and then your work becomes more and more useful, more and more targeted, more and more fit for purpose as you go. So now I've got my first visual. I've got the year and the rainfall amount. The next thing I would typically do is I like to throw some conditional formatting on top of that. So I'm going to put data bars. And just by adding data bars to that visual, I'm able to very quickly and easily see, I'm sort of profiling the data, if you like. And it looks orders of magnitude correct to me. You know, there's dry years, wetter years, but the most rain we've had in this data set is 436 millimeters in a year. Now, when I drag this rainfall amount on, this is called an implicit measure, but I encourage you to write your own measures, which is what I've done here. And so this is just the DAX formula, and it says add up the rainfall from that column. I've also given it a good name, rainfall in millimeters, and I've also adjusted the formatting. And so you can see it's the same numbers, but the name's different, the formatting is slightly different. So that's pretty good. So I always recommend that you write your own measures even though it's an additional step, by doing that, you get to understand your data, you get better at DAX, and all in all, you'll be a better Power BI user. All right, so if we sort of go back to my plan, remember I said work out the rain, and then I've got to work out how much rain I'm actually capturing on my roof. And so simple mathematics, the amount of rain multiplied by the area of the roof is going to generate will tell me how much water I've captured. And so I could go ahead and write a measure now, and I could hard code my roof area. My roof is 167 square meters. But if you were doing this in Excel, you wouldn't hard code 167 square meters inside your formula. You would probably put, well, good Excel, you would put the 167 in a cell, and then you'd refer to that cell. And I recommend you do the same thing here inside Power BI. So what I've done is I've created a measure called roof area in square meters, and I've hard coded the 167 inside the measure. So think of it as a cell containing that reference. And I can bring that measure into my visual. And of course, we're getting the same number all the way down the visual, because the area size, the square meters, don't change depending on the year or depending on the rain. And so when you see the data like this is perfectly intuitive. And importantly, when you do this, it becomes obvious that in order to get the amount of water that I've captured, I've got to take this number and multiply it by this number. And so the next formula that I've got is called water captured, and I'll bring that in and I'll show you the formula. It's a simple case of taking that roof area square meters, which is basically this measure here, and multiply it by the rainfall, which is this one here, and that gives me the water captured in liters. So yes, I might just put some visual. I might put my conditional formatting on top of that now, just to have it. Just makes it easier to consume the data, and of course the pattern of that water capture is going to be consistent with the rainfall, because those two things are proportional in this case. But the most water that I've captured in any year from this location with a roof space of 167 is 72,000 litres. So. All right, so now the next thing I have to do to come back to the plan, so we capture the water, it's going into the tank. How much water am I consuming? And so always go to Dr. Google. That's what I do. If you're in the environmental industry, you might already know some of these things, but I went to Google and just searched for what's the average water consumption. In fact, Google helped me with this one. And it says that it's about 340 litres per day for a two-person household. So, let's just call it 170 litres a day per person. I realise that as the number of people in the household grows, there may be some sort of diminishing per person usage, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say 170 litres per person, and will be the number. But of course, it might not be exactly 170. I mean, you might. Some people might say, well, I reckon it's 200. Someone else might say, well, I reckon it's 250. And so what I would typically do in this case is not hard code my consumption per day, but instead I'd generate a parameter. And that's pretty much what I did in this particular case. So I'll jump over to a new sheet here. So what I've done here is I've created a parameter table where I can select the consumption, and based on the number that I've selected, it's going to have an impact on my chart over here. I haven't got the data in here yet, but notice when I click on one of these consumption numbers, this number here changes. And I want to just quickly show you how I created that. So you come up to the modeling tab and you create a parameter. So I'll click on new parameter. And so when you create a parameter, it generates a table, which I'll show you in a second. But in this case, I've generated a parameter starting at 100, 1400, but starting at 100, and let's say go up to 300, incrementing in amounts by 10. And so this is all I have to do to generate what I've already done. So this is how you create a parameter table. And when you do that, what will happen is you'll get this. So I've got a brand new table containing the values from 100 to 300, incrementing by 10. And importantly, this brand new table here is not connected to anything in my model. There's no relationship with this table. And this slicer over here basically points to the table. So when I click on the slicer, I'm filtering the table. And then this measure basically tells me what value have I selected in my slicer. So it's a table with a slicer and a measure that automatically gets generated. And when I click on a particular value here, my measure gets updated. And because my measure gets updated, I'm able to use that measure in my visual. So when I click on a different number here, my daily consumption per person changes in my visual. What I did in this case is I hard-coded the number of people in my household. I could also use a parameter table for that if I wanted to be able to have a matrix of different numbers of people living in a household. In my case, I decided just to hard code 2 people. So I've got that in there. And then, of course, consumption is going to be daily consumption per person times by the number of people. But I also need to multiply it by how many days consumption. And so what I did was I wrote another measure which tells me how many days exist within my visual. Now, at the moment, I've got my visual on the year. And so in the year 2007, there are 365 days. And it's a very simple measure. It just says, count how many rows are in the calendar table. And so what's happening here is that we're first of all filtering on the year 2007. When we count the number of rows, we get 365. But of course, when we get to 2008, that was a leap year, and therefore the consumption days is 366. So this is a really good way of getting your formulas to respond to the filters that I have in my table. So in a moment, I'm going to jump over to look at a month's worth of data, and this formula is going to respond. So when I look at a single month, it's going to say 28, 29, 30, 31, whatever that number is. So now I've got my daily consumption coming from my slicer. I've hard-coded the number of people in the household. My consumption days is a formula which responds to the period filter that I've got applied. And then finally, I can come up with the total consumption, which unsurprisingly is just the multiplication of those 3 numbers together. But notice how this feels like Excel. The way I build these reports, I build it intentionally to feel like Excel. If this was in Excel, you would be able to write these formulas. And the reason I lay them out like this in this case, it's a table, is to encourage you to think about the data. And when you can see the data on the page, it helps you work out in your mind what's the formula that I have to write to be able to extract the data that I'm after. Okay, so that's all good. I've now got my total consumption by year, and I've got my water captured by year. The next thing I want to do is just have a look at how many days coverage do I have. And so I'm going to jump over to another page here. I've got all the data the same, and I want to calculate my days coverage. So this is the data by year. But if let me bring in month as well. I'll bring in the month number of year, and I need to change this to be date summarized. And I should also just change this so that it's whole numbers. It just looks a little bit better. once again, I would normally sort of go ahead and make some changes, but I'm just trying to save a little bit of time. So here's the year 2007, months 1 through to 12, January through to December. Here's my total consumption, and here's my water captured. And immediately you can see that the amount of water captured in January 2007 is not enough to meet the total consumption for January 2007. And so, of course, this is what I'm building out. I'm building out a way of trying to visualize this. But I've now got the data loaded in such a way, I've got my formulas written in such a way that I can start to understand what's going on. And so that's my total consumption. And in fact, I could bring in another measure, which I've written here. Once again, if you did this in Excel, you would do it in a heartbeat. These are not complex measures. The day's coverage is the water captured divided by the daily consumption per person multiplied by the people in the house. So, so you can see here that in January 2007, I had 29.96, so basically 30 days cover for that 1 month. Whereas for February, very dry month, I literally only had 2 days coverage the entire month. All right, so just having a look at a few different ways now of analysing this data. What I've done here is I've basically taken the same formulas. I really don't need any more formulas now. But what I've done is I've taken the months out and I've brought the date in. So now I'm just looking at basically what is the wettest day we've had in the 15 years of the data that I'm analysing. And so I've got the dates here coming from my calendar table. So this is the wettest day in the last 15 years at Swan Reach, 21st of March 2011. There were 70 mils of rain. On Sydney standards, that's not a lot of rain, but on Swan Reach standards, that's a lot of rain. So nearly 3 inches in the old money. So with my roof, I would have gathered 11,000 litres. Now remember, the original question is what size rainwater tank do I need? And the council wanted me to have a 50,000 litre rainwater tank. And we can see that on the wettest day, well, in any reasonable time horizon, I could have only captured 11,000 litres. Of course, if we had 5 days in a row like that, like it's been happening in Sydney lately, then maybe we'll get to 50,000 litres. But I'll show you what happens over time in a moment. And so, so yeah, that's basically the wettest day of the year. And then as I started further to analyse this, what I decided to do was to build a small multiples chart. Now, this is a relatively new tool, a new visual. And so I basically started off with this, which is this is just a straight column chart, if you like. And this is showing the months on this axis and the total water captured on the vertical axis. And that's just the measure that I wrote here. But with this concept of small multiples, you can take any chart. And in this case, I brought the year as the small multiple. So by dragging the year into here, it literally splits that one chart into small mini versions of that same chart. There's a few configuration options here. I went into general, I'm not sure where it is here, under the grid, and I said I want 5 rows and 3 columns, which basically filled out that data for me. And this chart has the ability to cross filter. So what I've got over here is a second visual showing me the year and month. And so I've sorted this particular visual. This is just a table, I think. I've sorted this table from the wettest month down to the driest month. And so when I click on the wettest month of the year, you can see this cross filter behavior working. And so this is the wettest month of the year. It captured 22,000 litres, which is 64 days coverage. But now notice how I get to see, well, what happened in the next month and the next month and the next month. And so even without trying to get a continuous level of my tank, you know, blind Freddy can see that even though I captured 20,000 litres in an entire month, the next month, in this case, if I hover over this, is 468 litres captured. And in fact, what I could do, if I came up to grab my day's coverage and I bring it in as a tooltip, when I hover over this data point, I can see that my day's coverage here was 1.38 days. So this highest ever month will give me 60 days coverage, 64 days coverage, but the next month only basically 1 day's coverage. And so over 2 months, basically, I'm going to have used all of that water. So I cannot see, based on this data, I mean, let's just have a look at another one here. So February, big month followed by a small month. You could argue just by visualizing this data that this looks like a pretty big month. So this was April 2014. So this is actually the fourth heaviest rainfall month on record. Pretty good coverage the next few days, but the next few months, sorry, but this one's 44 plus 16. You're still going to use the water within 2 consecutive months. You know, looking at these ones, 27, 24. So from the analysis that I've done here, this to me clearly confirms that I don't need a tank bigger than 20,000 litres based on all of the numbers that I've been talking about, which is 170 litres per day. Of course, if the number of people in the household changed or the daily consumption changed, then all of these numbers are going to change. But okay, so look, I'm just conscious of the time. I'm just going to jump over to a wrap-up slide and see whether there's any questions about that. So also, just before we jump to questions, so I do have a training company. We do training here in Australia, but I also have video on demand training companies called Schoolwave.training. And I have got a special discount, 20% off for anyone that uses this coupon code. So just take a note of that coupon code if you'd like to have a look at some of the training, and that coupon will last for the next 2 weeks. So with that, let me jump over to Alice and see whether there's any questions about that.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks a lot for the discount. That's awesome. Good time of year to do training as well, right before end of financial year. We didn't have too many questions, but I think Joanna was commenting saying it's really interesting and maybe rolling averages might be useful for different types of analyses.
What time do we have to wrap up,
Alice? We usually go until 1, but if you've got time, you've got more than enough. And I was also having a thought about, so you've done really awesome analysis, kind of back of the envelope style analysis, and talking through how we can use Power BI as more of a kind of data review and analysis step. If you were to take it to the next level and actually track the flow capture of water into your rainwater tank and do it like a next level, did you want to just comment on what sort of DAX you might need for that, if it's iterators or any challenges you foresee?
If you sort of go back and look at my other video, I started off with the assumption that I would track the water going in, I'd track the water coming out, and get a running total, and I'll be able to see the level at any point in time. The complication from a DAX perspective, as you can see from my data, is that if you start off, let's say you start off with 50,000 litres, at some point in time, you're going to hit 0. And at that point, you have to stop taking the consumption out of the tank because there's nothing in there. If you can assume that the balance could go negative, it would be an easy calculation. You would just work out what's going in, what's coming out, and you'll be able to track that over time. The complication from a DAX perspective is once you hit 0, you have to stop taking water out of the tank, and you don't start again until water goes back into the tank. And that's a very complex problem to solve in DAX. Now, it could be solved in other means. And in fact, if I was to solve it, Now, I also mentioned before that the old 80-20 rule. So I believe I could solve that DAX problem. If I was to do it, I would do it as a calculated column, but I would abandon the concept of being able to select the consumption. So I would hard code all the numbers. One of the things about a calculated column is that it won't respond to a slicer. So I can't change the 170 per day to 200 and expect my calculated column to update. So if I was to solve it, I would do 2 calculated columns in my data table, but I'd have to write quite a complex function that checks on a daily basis to see whether there's any water in the tank and only subtract the consumption if there's a positive balance in the tank. So very complex. If I had to guess, I reckon it'd take me 4 hours to solve it, to be honest. And to me, it's not worth it because I was able to get the information I needed without solving it. But to do it running total, you know, if I wanted to do that, was the question about a running total, Alice, or sorry?
Rolling averages.
Rolling averages, yeah. So if I wanted to do a rolling monthly consumption, the way I would try and solve that problem from a DAX perspective, I would load my data at the monthly level or at any, you know, whatever level makes sense. And if I look at my consumption, total consumption, so this is basically, consumption is a bad one. We would look at the water capture, right? Because that's the one that varies a lot. So if I wanted to come up with a 12-month rolling average, so what's the average monthly rainfall over a 12-month period? That might be a good example. So yeah, I'd write a new DAX measure, and there's always different ways of solving problems. Whoops, lost my measure. Let me just do it again. So if I was to try and do a rolling, rolling 12-month average rainfall. So there's a function called, so we need to use calculate. So calculate is the most important function in the DAX language. And I need to use it because I need to modify my filtering behavior. So I want to calculate the water captured in liters. And there's a function called dates in period. And it's asking me for, the first question is, where is my calendar date, which is this one. And you know, this is complex, but my start date in this case is going to be the max of the calendar date. I'm not going to go in and explain all of this because it'll take a little bit too longer. And then how many intervals I want to go back in time, so minus 12 months. Now, what this formula should do, fingers crossed, unscripted, is it should give me a 12-month rolling total. Now, it doesn't look good to me. Oh, yeah, no, that looks good. Now, it's very hard to visualize these, so I would typically come and throw data bars on because it just makes it easier. So, yeah, you can see that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it gets bigger every month until January. And so the point, of course, is that there's only 1 month's worth of data here. There's 2 months worth of data here. So there's different ways of solving that. I might just say something like if, I might say if the max, I might say, yeah, min of the calendar date is greater than or equal to, and then I have to specify the date. So that'll be date 20, I need 2008, right? So basically what I'm saying is, as long as my calendar, as long as I'm in the year 2008, give me the result, otherwise don't give me the result. I'm hoping that'll blank out all of the first 12 months. And so now you can see this is actually my rolling 12-month aggregate rain. And I need to divide that by 12 to get the rolling 12-month average. And so that's basically the number. I would always write a measure like this, but once I've written it, then I might go ahead and change my visual so that I can actually start to visualize the data in a way that makes more sense. So this is my basically rolling 12-month average rainfall, and so you go way back here. This particular axis is months, but I might bring my data in now because I'd have to drill down on it. Yeah, so you can see it was quite wet back in 2011. This has been getting drier and drier and drier from then on. But the rolling numbers like that are quite good at smoothing out the data, so it's less spiky, I guess. But
yeah, definitely, and especially for something like a rainwater tank where the storage, you're not interested in not so much the daily totals, but it's more of a volumetric calc as well to take all that smoothing out. That's awesome. Thanks so much for doing live DAX, Matt. It's so interesting to hear like thoughts inside your brain as a DAX expert, how you approach and explain these different kind of problems, and especially drawing parallels with Excel. I think so many people on our call kind of come from an engineering and science background where they're gurus in Excel, and it just shows you Power BI. It's can do very similar types of analysis, but you can get heaps more kind of power and kind of analytics with all the interactions, all the streamlining calcs.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things about Power BI is that you tend to build your model as an asset. When you build a report in Excel, it tends to be a bespoke report, one-off report to solve this problem. When you build something in Power BI, and you would have noticed as I step through this, each one of these things is an asset. It's part of my model, and I can build something new without starting from scratch. Whereas in Excel, you tend to go back and start again every time you want to do something different. Whereas with Power BI, you start with a small core and you grow it over time, and it becomes an expanding, growable asset.
Yeah, and I loved all of the different opportunities that you took to soft code different things in Power Query, and the use of parameters makes it really reusable as well. And I think on a similar note, Pat had a comment about this thought process. So he's doing similar calculations to what he's doing for battery sizing against solar input consumption.
Exactly the same.
So,
exactly the same. Yeah.
Yeah, once you come up with kind of the thought process, the patterns, you're familiar with how to implement these calcs in Power BI, then you can start making more reusable kind of templates and subbing out maybe rainfall for power consumption or.
So let me just call out what I said at the start though, and that is you should be expecting to make mistakes. And the biggest barrier for making progress is if you say to yourself, I don't know how to do this, therefore I'm not going to start, then you will never start. So just start off with the assumption that you are going to make some mistakes. You don't have to understand the final result in order to get started. Just point in the general direction, head down the road. You know you're heading the right direction. Make a few mistakes. Sometimes you have to back up, go forward. But if you wait until you're clear how to do it before you start, you'll never make progress.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that vein, probably lucky last question. This is from Arush. Just asking, can you please share any tips or resources for improving DAX knowledge?
Well, look, I'll plug my own material. So if you go to my website, the shortcut for my website is xbi.com.au, X for X-ray, xbi.com.au. The cheapest and easiest way to get some quick DAX knowledge is come here to my website under this knowledge base. Everything here is a blog article which I've written over the last 8 years now. And so all of these items, I think, are foundation things that you should know to be good with, or to get started with Power BI, particularly with that. So that's a great way to get started. I recommend my book. Don't believe me? Ask Alice. Go to Amazon and look at the book reviews. People tell me that my book is very helpful for people getting started, particularly if they've got an Excel background. So read my book. You can buy it online. It's like $20 or something like that. Is the digital version, and the paperback's $40. And I guess the thing about my book is that it takes you through a structured learning process. So, and in fact, I would go as far as to say you can learn everything online for free, but you will make mistakes along the way. You don't know whether you're getting good advice. And so really what my book does is take you through a structured learning process. They're the cheapest and easiest ways of doing it. I've got training, as I mentioned. Get onto forums, go to community.powerbi.com and ask questions. That's a great way to learn as well. So yeah, Alice, you've got some training, so.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit of a plug as well. If anyone is in the Enviro industry and does want to learn Power BI kind of tailored for the environmental applications, we do have a few training courses as well. But we've got more comments in the chat about your book. Joanna's 2/3 of the way and says, highly recommend. We love it. It's a very thin book compared to, if anyone's seen the DAX Bible by Marco and Alberto. Matt's book is much more achievable. It's nice and thin. Do not start
with a definitive guide to DAX. That is a fantastic book. If you want to really have depth of understanding, you need to read that book, but do not read it in the first 2 years. Yeah,
it's very heavy, very theoretical. Really good, really great. Logic there, but it's, if you want to get started, much more practical approach. I think Matt's got you covered. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for your time. That was really interesting. We've got lots of nice comments in the chat. Looks like everyone's enjoyed the session as well. I might just share screens for 1 minute here, just to remind everyone that we've recorded this session. If you want to watch today's session or any of our previous sessions as well, we've been running this group, I think, for about 1.5 years now. They're up on our blog and our YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch any of the other presentations. And we're always looking for people to present. You don't have to be an expert. The beginner presentations also really interesting, just sharing your journey of using Power BI for your environmental applications. Please get in touch with us. Christian, that's Christian's email. We would love to hear from you. So we will have a presentation next month. We're still sorting it out. So yeah, if there's any volunteers for next month is May, then it would be really fantastic if you wanted to reach out to us. Otherwise, I'm sure we know lots of people in the Power BI community. We'll rope someone in. But thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on the call today. It was really good to see lots of people, lots of our regulars and lots of new people as well. So thanks, and hope everyone has a lovely Easter.
Thanks all. Thanks, Alice.
No worries. I'll just stop the recording.